What's going on, y'all? Welcome to episode 59 of the Half Price Concessions podcast, featuring Rick Houston of the Scene Vault podcast. Before we get to Rick, I want to say a big thank you to everybody and anybody who is listening to us, whether this is your first episode listening or you've listened to quite a few of our previous shows. We sincerely appreciate you being here and appreciate you subscribing to the podcast on whatever podcast app you choose to listen to. And special thanks to our partners as well at North Carolina 811, Performance Center Racing Warehouse, Accelerated Graphics, and Keith Montgomery at Montgomery Performance Consulting. Also want to give a shout out to our friend Boo Carlisle at the Kickin' Asphalt vlog. Make sure you check out the Kickin' Asphalt vlog on YouTube. Just search for Kickin' Asphalt vlog and you can follow along with Boo Carlisle and all his racing adventures down in Georgia. Now, on to today's episode. Normally, this podcast has featured interviews with drivers, crew members, track operators, things like that. This will be the first time we actually talk to someone who the main draw from is podcasting. Rick Houston co-hosts a podcast called the Scene Vault podcast, which dives deep into NASCAR history with excellent interviews with legends from the past and some current racers as well. Him and his co-host Steve Waid also go through old issues of Winston Cup Scene, Grand National Scene, the former magazine that was one of the forerunners, one of the biggest names in NASCAR media as far as covering the sport on a regular basis, dropping big information, news, and whatnot. It was the publication in NASCAR for quite some time. And Rick, through his podcast, the Scene Vault podcast, is helping to keep those memories alive. He's also doing things to help preserve some of that valuable NASCAR history that could be lost to a trash bin or to a natural disaster. Rick has done a lot of things behind the scenes to help preserve some of that history, and I was so glad he was able to make some time to talk to us about the podcast itself, the origins of it, the idea for it, and a little bit of his history so you can get to know just why Rick Houston is so dedicated and so hardcore about his NASCAR history. So buckle up. I hope you guys enjoy this one. The Half Price Concessions podcast will be back on the other side of this break with Rick Houston of the Scene Vault podcast.
Planning on doing some digging in your yard? Your simple backyard project could quickly turn dangerous. Buried underground cables and lines are just inches below the surface. So don't forget to make one very important call to 811. Calling 811 is the first step in having your buried utilities marked so you know where it is safe to dig. 811 is free, it's fast, and it's the law. For digging projects big or small, make the call to 811.
This episode of the Half Price Concessions podcast is brought to you with support from Performance Center Racing Warehouse. In addition to being the home of the PRW chassis, Performance Center offers in-house setups and consulting, plus suspension and chassis pull-down analysis, along with their fabrication shop that can reclip your race car with the fastest turnaround in the industry. Give Roger Johnson and the Performance Center team the chance to earn your racing business by calling them today at 704-838-1400 or visit them online at performancecenter.com. That's PERFORMANCENTER.com.
Hey podcast listeners, I'm Keith Montgomery of Montgomery Performance Consulting, and I want to help speed up your racing program. Whether you're racing dirt, asphalt, or road course, put my years of experience to work for you. Our pull-down services will help find where you're giving up speed so you can unload faster and run up front. We also offer trackside consulting and data testing to help you find speed and balance. And with our central location in Burlington, North Carolina, you can come to us for discounted rates on pull-down sessions. Call me today at 336-382-1835. Like us on Facebook at Montgomery Performance Consulting, and let us help your racing program today.
The Half Price Concessions podcast is brought to you in part by our friends at Accelerated Graphics. Whether you need a wrap for your race car, signs for your business, banners for your special occasion, decals, apparel, or anything else, you need to call Jason Turner at Accelerated Graphics. Call him at 336-266-5653 Visit them online at www.worth2tenths.com. You can also find them on Facebook by searching for Accelerated Graphics. Anything you need to give your racing career, your personal business, or anything you need a nice, clean, professional, exciting look, call Accelerated Graphics today. Here on the Half Price Concessions podcast, and Rick Houston joins me. And Rick, first and foremost, thank you and Steve for all the work you guys do. I've listened to not every episode. I'm not gonna lie to you. I haven't listened to every episode,
Okay.
but I've listened to most of them. And
Okay. All right.
man, they make my commute and especially at work when I'm about to lose my sanity, I can put my earbuds in and listen to one of y'all's episodes. It helps me out a ton. So thank y'all first and foremost for what you do.
So you listen to us to stay sane? Whew, good night.
Yeah, maybe I should.
I'm not too sure about that, man.
Maybe I should put on Tony Robbins or someone else. But first and foremost, man, it seems like from everything I've seen, the podcast has gotten really good reception. It's got high ratings and whatnot. How do you perceive kind of the reception it's got? Are you surprised? Are you satisfied? Do you want more? How do you look at it?
Yes. I'm surprised. I'm satisfied, and yes, I would love to have more like everybody else. But I have honestly been kind of shocked by the reception that we've had. In the nearly 3 years that we've been doing this podcast, we have never received a single negative review. We've never received a single negative comment on social media. And if you can say that, I think you're onto something.
You're doing a lot better than most.
And it's certainly not that we're politically correct or anything like that. We tell real stories. And I think that's what people respond to, is the fact that the stories are real, they're unvarnished, and they're very honest. I think over and above everything else, from everything that I've been able to gather, they're just very, very real, very honest.
Not to say. I'm glad you're satisfied with it, because everybody that I've shared it with, I've shared episodes with my dad, I've shared episodes with people that are my age, and it crosses over a lot because there's so much love out there for, there's always love out there for the good old days of anything. But especially with NASCAR, because it seems like, when you were in it at the time, the context you had was in the moment. But now you guys are going back, and on a lot of these, you're kind of filling in a lot of those areas that were kind of gray or whatever, just with your the memories and the experiences that you had. So it's just so cool. It's kind of like if you ever listen to them the wrestling podcasts out there, where now they go back and tell you why Ric Flair was pissed off at Ricky Steamboat or something like that. So it's a cool color to add.
Well, yes, this is a NASCAR history podcast, but for Steve and I think a big reason why people respond to the podcast is that for us, it's not history, it was our lives. And in Steve's case especially, he was there for a lot of the things that we talk about, if not the vast majority of things and events that we discuss. So it gives another perspective. We're not just talking about names out of a record book or a history book. We're talking about people that we knew and had relationships with or had experiences with. And, as far as it being the good old days, if there's one thing that I've really come to understand doing this podcast is no matter what time frame you're talking about, the good old days were always 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, because when I was in the sport in the 1990s and early 2000s, people then were talking about the good old days being the 1970s. And people in the 1970s were talking about the good old days of the 1950s and 60s.
We're just never satisfied.
And we're never satisfied. The good old days are always going to be whenever you were growing up or whenever you were active or whatever. So our bread and butter is the 1970s, 80s, and 90s when the sport was at its all-time height.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why people have responded the way that they have, because we're talking to people and about people that we actually knew.
Yeah. So, in order, you're not just a podcaster. You bring so much background to it from your career in the sport as a media member. So, to anyone that doesn't quite understand how Rick Houston arrived as the Scene Vault podcast co-host, give me a little bit about what your media background was in the sport.
Well, I first became interested in the sport in 1989. I grew up a huge baseball fan in general, but in particular of the Big Red Machine, the Cincinnati Reds and Pete Rose. I mean, when I was a kid and a young adult, I thought Pete Rose walked on water.
Yeah.
And, of course, he had all his trouble and got suspended, got banned for life and all that. And so I had to find a new hero. And I found that in NASCAR. My best friend from high school, Joe Estep, I just happened to be over at his house one Sunday, and we watched a race. It was the 1989 Daytona 500. And I was immediately struck. And I'm not the kind of person who can just have an interest. I have to have an obsession.
Yeah, you got to go jump in the 10-foot deep end if I can't swim.
It's not enough for me to write. It's not enough for me to read Winston Cup Scene. I have to go write for Winston Cup Scene. So it became a passion. It became an obsession, and it all worked out. And I started writing in 1991. For a publication. A guy had won $20,000 in the Virginia State Lottery and started a racing publication. I went to work for him, and 6 months later he ran out of money.
Imagine that.
So I moved back to my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, and bounced around there for a little while, and then finally moved back to North Carolina for good in October of 92. And I had a dream of working for Winston Cup Scene. And when I moved here in October of 92, I wound up with at a little community newspaper up in the mountains of North Carolina. That's where I learned journalism, hardcore, everyday, in the trenches journalism. And basically almost exactly 2 years later, while I was at the newspaper, 2 years later, I went to work for Winston Cup Scene full time. So, it was a dream come true.
I was about to say that's a pretty cool. Did you actually cover any NASCAR while you were at that newspaper?
Oh yeah. I probably, according to them, probably covered it a little too much.
I was about to say that there had to be some leanings.
But I will say this: the community newspaper that I was working at was owned by the paper in North Wilkesboro.
Oh.
And so, of course, at the time, North Wilkesboro Speedway was still open. And so the people in the area, of course, had an interest in NASCAR. And so I actually went to several races for that newspaper. I actually got to go to the 1992 Hooters 500.
Oh.
And I was there that day. And that was actually the first race that I was actually ever paid to cover.
Boy, you picked a good one.
Well, it was kind of funny. In October, when I moved here, I was sleeping in my car and sneaking food out of the press box.
Yeah.
And when I went to Atlanta, when I was headed out of town to go to Atlanta, I stopped by the Journal-Patriot office, and they gave me a check for $300.
Oh, that probably felt like $3 million, didn't it?
You have, I'll almost start crying about it. I mean, because it was, just 2 months before, well, less than 2 months before, I'd been sleeping in my car. And so when I had $300 in my pocket, I honestly did feel like I was Rockefeller.
Yeah.
And, I actually got a motel room.
Oh, man.
Now,
you could lay down.
Oh, yeah, man.
Pillows and everything.
And food. I was able to eat.
The continental breakfast.
I was able to eat. And then for the race to play out like it did, it being Richard Petty's last race and Jeff Gordon's first race and then the championship, That was a pretty special weekend in my career.
Now, how long were you with Scene?
9 years.
Okay.
9 years, and wound up being the Busch Series editor. I was a smaller fish and a bigger. I was a bigger fish in a smaller pond in the Busch Series. But the time that I was in the Busch Series, it was the heyday of that division with Jason Keller and Randy LaJoy and Buckshot Jones and Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Matt Kenseth and Elliott Sadler and just any number of drivers on down to drivers like Glenn Allen and Shane Hall and it was. There were personalities literally in every truck.
Yeah. And
I loved that division at that time. I mean, it was just a small community. It was a small family. The officials, I'll never forget, going to Nashville was a big thing for me, and racing in Nashville with my family and friends being there. And I would bring my friends, and my brother was there, and Sandy and Joe were there. And I asked one of the officials if he could take them out on the track in the pace car and just give them 2 or 3 laps around the track.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I'm busy right now." He reached his pocket and threw me the keys to the pace car.
That's so crazy.
And I wish that somebody would have had a camera on my brother's face, because it was like, you really are a big shot, aren't you? They're giving you the keys to the freaking pace car. And so, yeah, that was just one story out of a million.
Yeah.
I loved being in that division at that time.
So in between when you wrapped up with Scene till, get me to the time between your time wraps up with Scene to when we get the podcast going here just a couple of years ago. What do you do? What do you do in between that time to lead up to this?
Well, I went to work. I left Scene, went to work for NASCAR as a PR person for the Busch Series. I worked there for 11 months, exactly 11 months to the day. And let's just say I was invited to no longer work for them. Was downsized. It was no, I didn't get fired for doing whatever, but I was just downsized, and that was very painful. And for several years after that, it was a struggle. And taught high school English for 3 semesters, and found out very quickly that as a teacher, I really missed journalism. And so since June of 2006, I've been full-time freelance.
Okay.
And have been very, very fortunate to write some books about NASCAR and about one of my other big passions in life, interests in life, the human spaceflight program. And my career benchmark work right now is a book that I wrote on the people who worked in mission control during the Apollo program. And that was made into a documentary film, and I actually got to go to England in support of that film, got to go to Australia in support of that film. And so that's been a huge part of my professional life. But I was contacted by a publisher several years ago about writing a book about the 1992 Hooters 500, and that kind of got my interest back going a little bit. And then I wrote another book for the same publisher on NASCAR, and Steve Waid and I got back in touch about preserving all the Winston Cup Scene newspapers, and out of that grew the idea for the podcast. And we've been doing the podcast since, I can't remember when it was posted, but it was 2018. So here in just a month or two, it'll be 3 years since we've been doing the podcast.
That's wild. Now Scene, I know, was, from the research I did, just such a important piece of NASCAR history, because like back in the 70s, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't text messaging, there wasn't, thank God, there wasn't Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, none of that. From the 70s on, an incredibly important publication. When did Scene come to an end? I'm trying to piece together the timeline here.
Scene started in April of 1977, and it was last published in November, December of 2009. So for 32 years, It was the best and most complete record of what took place in NASCAR. And I very firmly believe that. And there were other newspapers out there like National Speed Sport, and they did a good job covering NASCAR, but they also covered kart and dirt track racing and World of Outlaws and whatever else. But we were solely focused on Cup racing.
Yeah.
And then later on they added full coverage of all the Busch Series races. And then when the Truck Series started in 95, we started covering that full time. So NASCAR's top 3 national divisions. So it was the week that I started work at Scene. I went from a paper, the community newspaper, I went from a paper that published less than 5,000 every week to the week after I started, we went over 100,000 in paid circulation. So it really and truly was the paper of record in NASCAR. They're coming to get you, man.
I'm about to say, I'm glad it's the EMTs, not the police.
Yeah, they're coming to get you.
That's so cool. So when you and Steve got hooked back up, and the idea starts to kind of churn in your head to do this podcast, was it done with the intention of, hey, we need to kind of keep this in the forefront before it gets too far forgotten? Or was it just you guys just wanting to have fun and see if something would be worth the time?
Well, over and above everything, we are really and truly trying to make sure that all the Winston Cup Scene, the Grand National Scene, Winston Cup Scene, and NASCAR Scene newspapers get preserved. I've got every issue, and that is such a wonderful resource for research and just to sit down and enjoy. And it's history that if it gets lost, it'll be gone forever. So we are trying really, really hard to make sure it gets preserved. And out of that grew the idea for the podcast. And I had a podcast on NASCAR history in 2009, 2010.
Okay.
That was basically the same format. It's actually the same music. And everything, but I think in the 40 episodes that we did, I think we might have had 5 listeners.
Oh no!
Yeah,
it was the podcast that nobody heard.
Yeah, it was the podcast that nobody heard, and actually the first 10 or 15 episodes of the Scene Vault podcast were interviews that I did back then.
Oh, okay. So you just had the audio archived.
Yeah. I had the audio archived, and it was with people like David Pearson and Bud Moore, who had already passed on, Ned Jarrett, Bobby Allison, Junior Johnson. So they were really good interviews. Nobody ever heard them.
Yeah.
So on this one, hopefully people are starting to hear it again.
Maybe at least 6 people heard
them. Yeah.
So the majority of the episodes, not all of them, but a good chunk of them, it's kind of a 2-part deal. The first part is a piece of an interview or a part of an interview you guys have done with somebody, and then the second part you guys dive into random issues of Scene.
Yeah.
When it comes to the guest lineup, I'm gonna get down to meat and potatoes. I might steal some of your secrets if you got any. How do you even go about picking? Because the ocean you are fishing in, there's so many people, personalities, drivers, crew chiefs. I mean, how do you even narrow it down to who you're going to go interview? Like, is there a process, or is it just kind of random?
Honestly and truly, it's basically random. I mean, it's people that we know. It's people that we've had experiences with. I mean, Steve is such a valuable part of that. I mean, his name alone brings so much credibility to this project. And if he doesn't line up the interview, when I line it up, I'll say, this is for a podcast that Steve Waid and I are doing.
You make sure his name's in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's not quite as much of the equation now, but when we very first started, because now the podcast has built up a little bit of name recognition and people are more familiar with it. I mean, it was actually kind of funny. Our most recent guest on the podcast was Michael Mcswain. People know him as Fatback. And Michael had posted on his Facebook page about being on the show and posted a link to it and all that. Well, one of the guys that I want to have on the show at some point actually commented and said that he listens to the show.
Wow.
Which is crazy to me. And so after he commented on the post and said that he listened to it and everything, well, I commented after him and tagged him and said, okay, when are you going to be on? So it's kind of a cool process, and it's kind of neat that people are starting to pick up on it.
That's pretty cool. Now, as far as the technical side of it, I know vast majority of your work has been on the print side of things. Did you have a little bit of challenge learning how to operate the mechanics of recording the audio, making sure it sounds decent, how to get it published? Like, was that a challenge for you?
Yes. The very first episode that Steve Waid and I did back in 2018, I packed up all my stuff, went down to Charlotte, got to Steve's house, unpacked everything, and I had forgotten the connector between the soundboard and the computer back home. And so I had to pack everything back up, go back home, get the piece, and come back the next day.
Oh, what a bummer.
And as far as the technical side of it, I know how to press record. I know how to get that done. And then I run it through a program called Levelator, which brings all the sound levels up to where it's supposedly supposed to be. But as far as a sound engineer, I'm as far from that as it is possible to be. Last year we started videoing all our interviews for our YouTube channel. Well, I didn't know anything about it. I just turned the video camera on.
Yeah.
And now there's an issue of the recording just being in mono. And so I had to figure out a way to get it in stereo. Well, then I did, and yeah, this is me. I'm not a technician. I got everything set up for an interview a couple of weeks ago, got the camera set up, got the audio stuff set up. Took me forever. I sat down, did an interview, and stopped recording on the audio and looked over at the video camera, and I never turned it on.
Oh, that was just, what heartburn, man.
So, never turned it on. So when we post that interview on YouTube, there's going to be a card at the front that says we've had technical difficulties and we're just going to use still photos and stuff to illustrate it. So, yeah, I did not turn the video camera on.
So that's those moments, because I think anybody that does a podcast has had something along those lines, unless they're a genius. That's those moments where you like fully appreciate Harold Hamrick, guys at MRN or PRN that work in audio and can make it sound perfect. You're like, it sounds so easy when you're listening, but then when you the one responsible for it, it gets a little harder.
I'm gonna be honest with you. We did an interview last week that I could not mess up on. I absolutely positively would have died if we'd messed up on this interview. So I actually hired a buddy of mine who lives in the same town. He's actually a musician. He's got he's actually got a recording studio in his house. And so I actually got him to come along with me to make sure that everything was turned on and, the sound was where it needed to be. And that was so cool.
Yeah.
Because when I hit stop, I started talking to the guy that we were interviewing, and by the time I knew what was going on, my buddy already had everything broke down. That was, So my dream in life with the Scene Vault podcast is to get to a point where I have somebody to do that for me.
You got the sound engineer on staff.
Yeah, I got the sound engineer on staff. That will be the absolute highlight of anything that I could ever do. Now, is that ever going to happen? I don't know. But it was nice to have that buddy along.
So that's where I get jealous of guys like Joe Rogan or Dale Jr. that have,
oh my gosh,
like, a dedicated person in the back.
Don't even get me started.
Got a dedicated studio. Oh, must be nice.
Yeah.
We're out here recording in the Chevrolet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm super jealous of those guys. But so, obviously, your background in print. Did you find when you started doing these interviews, did you have to kind of learn a different way to ask questions or to dictate than how you did when you were like a reporter, or did that kind of come pretty naturally to you? 'Cause for some people, it's one thing to ask people questions when you're looking for quotes. It's another thing when you're trying to stir up a conversation that goes into like a podcast interview. So what was that like for you?
It's really and truly not been that big of a change from print to recording audio. And I'll be honest with you, it has. I think recording audio is easier to tell a story, because when you write something in print, you try to get across the emotion of the moment. When you record it in audio, it's much easier to, well, you can actually hear the person talking, so you know what the emotion is. Since we've added the video camera, I really had a concern about how the video camera would change the dynamic of an interview. But, we don't have a big honking $3 billion camera. It's a little video camera, and it's out of the way. And I try to set it up where it's not straight in somebody's face that they're staring at and making them nervous or whatever. So I really don't think that the video camera has changed the dynamic either. I think the video camera for our YouTube channel has just added another element of emotion, and people can see how people react. So
yeah, nothing like I think we talked earlier. There's nothing that duplicates being able to see someone's facial expression when they tell a story, or even just tone of voice. Yeah, like that. That got me on your Lake Speed interview, and just hearing his tone of voice when he would speak on certain things, and it would just rope me in like a cattle at the rodeo, man. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the biggest interviews that really kind of led me down a road I didn't know what to do. I was interviewing a guy by the name of Will Cronkite, and he had been a car owner and car builder back in the 70s and 80s, and his wife and child had actually been killed in a car wreck in the early, I think it was actually late 60s. And I didn't ask him specifically about their accident. I asked him about one of the drivers that he got to know who had been through some similar experiences. He'd lost one child to disease, and then another one got killed in an accident. And when he started talking about his friend, I believe his name was Greg Eller, he'd only ran like a handful of races, cup races, he actually got very emotional and broke down. And I had never had that happen before. Yeah. I mean, he literally broke down in tears. But I was torn between being a reporter and letting him talk and letting the moment pass by, or letting the moment unfold. I was torn between being the professional journalist, and I'm a man of faith. I'm a Christian. Yeah. And so the Christian in me wanted to reach out to him and console him and pat him on the back and ask him if everything was okay. So that's kind of where the emotion of that moment kind of took over. So it was really powerful.
Yeah, you don't want to be insensitive.
Yeah,
but you also realize this is the stuff that is gold.
Yeah, yeah. It was very real. It was very, very real.
Yeah. So I would never ask you to pick like a favorite one by any means, because you've had so many. I've had a lot that I've enjoyed. The Lake Speed one obviously was a big one as a fellow Christian, because I didn't know Lake Speed was a Christian. All I knew about Lake Speed,
if you didn't know Lake Speed was a Christian, you ain't been paying very close attention.
Apparently not. I was so in depth with Rusty Wallace because my uncle was in the engine department at Penske.
Okay.
So if it didn't concern Rusty Wallace, I wasn't paying much attention. Right. I just knew his car had Spam on it, and Michael Waltrip punched him twice. so learning that about him was super cool. and I know you probably don't have favorites. It'd be like picking a favorite kid. But have there been certain guests that you've had where maybe you've gone in with a certain notion of them, and then like 10 minutes in, you're like, oh my gosh, I was wrong, or like, man, this is not what I expected?
Almost every interview that we've done,
wow, yeah.
has been like that. And I'm not saying that, but the one that really and truly stands out the most to me, I would say probably the 2 episodes that we've done that I would personally consider to be among the most powerful, if not the most powerful, were with by far the least known person. We interviewed Lyndon Amick. I interviewed Lyndon. And when I went down to South Carolina to interview him, I knew that he had left NASCAR in order to join the National Guard, and he had wound up in Afghanistan in combat. So that's the story that I went down to South Carolina to get. And him talking about the experience of combat was just, I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, just amazing. I mean, here's this well-to-do kid who had driven in NASCAR, I don't want to say, well, he was just well-to-do.
Yeah.
He didn't have to go to Afghanistan for a job. But he had lived the life of a race car driver and then gave that up in order to go serve his country. And so he talked about the experience of combat, and that was very powerful. But then we took a break, and when I came back in to the room, he was taking off his jacket. And when I knew Lyndon in the Bush series in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was very straight-laced and an MRO guy, motor racing outreach guy. His dad was a very strong Christian. And when he was taking off his jacket, his arms were covered in tattoos.
Yeah.
And to me, if you want to have tattoos, knock yourself out. They're not for me. I hate a needle. So
Yeah.
I would never, ever get a tattoo, not for any moral reason. I'm just a chicken.
I'm the same way.
I don't want to, I'm not going to,
sitting in the chair for 6 hours with someone drills into me.
No, ain't going to happen. So before I even knew what I had said, I said, what in the world? And he goes, oh, these are my post-Jesus tattoos.
That'll raise an eyebrow.
And again, without thinking, I said, no, man, you mean your pre-Jesus tattoos? And he said, no, man, these are my post-Jesus tattoos, man. When I was in the Bush series and driving, and I was cheating on my wife, and I was a bad person, and I was cheating on her all the time and all that. And I looked down, and my recorder was still recording.
Oh, man.
And I said, hold on a second, let me turn this off, because I'm sure you don't want.
Yeah, you don't want him. You want him to hurt his character.
And he said, no, I'll talk about it.
Oh. Wow, I bet that was a shock. I mean, that's a very personal subject.
So after we got through talking about Afghanistan and his experience after that, he started talking about his wife and how he had cheated on her and how they'd had a bad relationship and they'd covered it up, and everybody thought that they were MRO and all that. And he said that she had gone to a church conference and got radically impacted by the Lord, and they had literally had a come to Jesus meeting, and he confessed everything, and they somehow, some way, miraculously mended their relationship, and now he's the associate pastor of a church.
Wow.
And so the story that I went down there to get, I got a lot more than that. And so those 2 episodes especially, to me, it's not just a NASCAR podcast.
Yeah.
It's about something way bigger. So, and we've had a few episodes like this.
Yeah.
The one that posted today I thought was pretty powerful. So that's what I love about journalism, is everybody that you meet has a story. may not be a happy story, may not be a famous story, but everybody has a story. And if you give me just a little bit of time, I can
pull it out of them.
I can pull it out of them.
So it kind of makes me think of that saying about the difference between fiction and nonfiction, that fiction has to be believable. because like you said, people are just, incredibly fascinating. And you've been doing it for however many years, but these last couple of years with podcasts, it's like, it's wild. And I'm sure you can attest to it. You have to, word your conversation and talk in a certain way where it does make them feel comfortable, because there's plenty of people out there that might want to do an interview and in the way a lot of today's journalism goes, where they're looking for a shock quote, they're trying to say something that's going to get them rattled, where they'll give them that soundbite, where yours and when you and Steve do it, it's a lot more conversation like, and like, we're not here to get you, but we are here to learn and see what you'll tell us.
Well, I think to me, I'm not trying to be the product. I'm not trying to be a brand. I'm just trying to be a reporter who goes out and gets a good story. And so I try my hardest to ask as short and succinct a question as possible. Where were you this day and what were you feeling? And then get out of the way and let them talk. People hear me talk on the podcast all the time, so they're used to hearing me talk. They already know all my stories.
Yeah.
So I try to let the person I'm interviewing do all the talking, or as much of the talking as possible.
Gotcha.
And so that's how you get the story.
I got you. I think we might be getting kicked out here. Hello.
I didn't know you were in here. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
My mask is tied around my ear.
You're fine. I ain't worried about you giving me nothing. We're almost done. I'm gonna wrap it up with one question.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
We didn't see him. We didn't see you either.
I'm hard to miss.
That's why I'm
You're fine.
back up the door.
Yeah. Rick, I'm leaving that in the episode. By the
No,
way.
you're not.
Yes, we're not editing that out. We'll get your family out of the cold.
Okay.
On this one, I'm sure you probably can't give away who's some of the upcoming people we're going to hear on Scene, but going forward, has your goals or ideas for it changed any, or are you just going to just keep on rolling with this thing, how it's going?
What we're doing appears to be working.
Yeah.
And so it would be kind of foolish to change that. I think I don't foresee any kind of format change.
You're happy with it?
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. Some of the people that we've interviewed, we have Ronnie Thomas coming up, who is the 1978 Winston Cup Rookie of the Year. And we talked to Ronnie. Well, Ronnie talked to us.
There we go.
Ronnie talked at us for about 2 hours, and I finally hit stop and was getting everything saved and backed up, and he kind of looked at us and he kind of laughed and he said, "You want to talk some more?" I have no doubt whatsoever that was a week ago Saturday that we went up there, and I honestly believe that we could still be sitting there in front of him and he'd still be telling stories.
Hey, as long as it's good stuff.
But Hut Strickland's the one that I didn't press record on the video. Got the second half of our interview with Jeff Hammond, but who knows what might happen next. We'll just have a random draw.
There you go.
Out of that big pool of people.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking time. I appreciate you meeting me, and I look forward to listening to more episodes. And
well, you got to listen to all of them first, man.
I got to catch up. Let's see. I started off real quick. The first one I listened to was the Junior Johnson tribute.
Okay. Yeah.
So
yeah,
it was kind of hard to top Junior. I'm just such a huge Junior Johnson fan, so it's been hard to top that one, but. Yeah, I got some catching up to do, so okay. I'll get there eventually.
I got you. All right, man. Cool.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Just a little postscript to add to this episode. That little part that you heard at the tail end before I asked Rick that last question to set the scene, we were actually sitting in Rick's car in the parking lot at a restaurant recording this. So we'd been sitting there for 30, 35 minutes, whatever it was, when I looked down and I seen Rick's wife coming toward the car, and she didn't realize we were still in there recording. Maybe she thought we were in my vehicle recording, but I wanted to leave it in there just for context, just to show, hey, we weren't in some big fancy recording studio that's purely dedicated to podcasting. We were two guys sitting in the front seat of a car having this conversation with a couple of microphones turned on. But can't say thank you enough to Rick for taking time to meet me to record this episode. I highly encourage you, if you are a fan of NASCAR from any period of time, you will find an episode or episodes of the Scene Vault podcast that you will just enjoy listening to. They're really good stuff. Check them out. They're available on pretty much every podcast platform you can find. Also, if you want to support the Scene Vault podcast, they have a page set up on Patreon, and they have a PayPal on there as well. So any episode you listen to, Rick kind of gives instructions on how you can financially give support to the Scene Vault podcast and all the work they do. So be sure and check that out. But sincere thanks to Rick for taking time to sit down with some nobody in podcasting to talk about his show, as I'm such a big fan of it. Thanks as well to all of our partners at North Carolina 811, Performance Center Racing Warehouse, Accelerated Graphics, and Montgomery Performance, Mr. Keith Montgomery. Thank you to all of you for listening to this podcast. If you've listened to a lot of our episodes, or this is your first one, I sincerely appreciate you being here. We've got more new material coming, so hang on tight. I know we were off for a couple of weeks there, but we're coming back strong. We got a couple of interviews we're looking to line up, some people we're looking to talk to, some stories we're looking to share. So make sure you stay tuned, stay subscribed to the Half Price Concessions podcast, however you're listening. And from all of us, my name is Tyler Williams, saying good night and God bless you. Thank you for listening.